in now, probably, right? Well, I'm glad to greet everybody and to greet Chile once again. She is with us. So, well, and the topic of Chile's lecture today is also on the East African interlacustrine region. The title of the lecture is Women and Power in Buganda Kingdom, which is in contemporary Uganda. So, Cecilia, you're most welcome, please.
Thank you very much, Dimitri, and let me greet Peter Skalnik. I'm very happy he's here with us, and moreover, he's such a specialist about state in Africa, so I think it will help us in trying to understand some of our examples. So yesterday we introduced the religious history of the Great Lake region and the emergence of the kingdoms, the connection between religion, especially Kubandwa cult that I've been studying for a long time, and the kingdom structure. So today I would like to try to give you some ideas about the structure of the kingdoms, and especially I would like to focus on gender as another mean to create a balance of power inside this social structure. Yesterday we discussed the role of religion in counterbalancing the political power. I think that gender is another important political dimension in this society. So let me open my PowerPoint. Sorry. Okay, can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Good. So I will try to give you very briefly some ideas about the histories of these kingdoms. They have been widely studied. They have a very important and old history, so I can just grasp some small ideas. We should say that the first kingdom which appeared in the interlacustrine region around the 15th century is Bunyoro. Bunyoro is located in the northern part of the region, and we can consider it a prototype of the centralized model of society, which then spread all over the region in quite similar form with slight differences, but this is the main model. And Bunyoro introduced some characteristics that were completely absent in the previous societies that we described yesterday as based on clan, Agnatic clan, which were mobile, traveling in the territory. Bunyoro introduced, first of all, a supreme leader and a capital, so a political center. And I should remember that the capitals, the interlacustrine capitals, were mobile capitals. They shifted when the king died, the capitals were moved on another place. This is an important characteristic of this kind of state. So just a short premise about the sources that we can use to study these old societies in a context where, as we all know, we don't have written sources, written documents. So what can we use, on which basis we can reconstruct the history of the kingdoms? Of course, on oral tradition, as Ian Bansina told us, and also on archaeology. On this map showing the Kitara Empire, which is a mythical entity covering all the region, you see a place that is quite important in the area, an archaeological site, which is Bigo Biamugeni. It is here in the center of the region, and Bigo is a huge system of earthwork, 10 kilometers wide, where archaeologists found a very big amount of pottery and cows' bones and a lot of kind of founds that is probably, could have been probably a capital of a pastoralist civilization. Maybe the first one, it is it belonged to this period in the 15th century. So as you can see here, we can use oral tradition, and we can try to cross oral tradition with archaeological evidence. The most important myth known in the region, which is also the myth of foundation of the Kubandwa religion, is the myth of the Bachuese. You see this word here, Bachuese. And Bachuese is also the term used to call the spirits nowadays. The mediums that I studied in the Kubandwa cult, they are possessed still by Bachuese. And who are the Bachuese? The myth tells us about a legendary empire, the Kitara, which was first governed by some supernatural figures called the Abatembuzi. The Abatembuzi were gods. At a certain moment, one Tembuzi king, Izaza, had to leave the country, and he left the kingdom in the custody of a goat herder, so of a man, of a human being called Bukuku. Bukuku had a daughter called Niña Muiru. Niña Muiru is an interesting name because it contained the root Muiru, Iru, which referred to the agriculturalist, to the lower class of the society. So the son of the king fall in love with this girl. The girl was a very strange figure because she born with only one eye and only one ear. And they gave birth, they conceived a child. This child will become the first king of the Bachuese dynasty. So he is a semi-god, son of a common people, of a common woman, and of a god. And this king took the name of Ndahura, the first king of the Bachuese dynasty. His son was called Wamara. Wamara moved the capital to Bigo, exactly in this area, near Bigo, in a place called Mubende, where there is still a sacred place, which is very important. But during the Wamara reign, something happened. Misfortune arrived. The people and also the herds, the cows, fall sick, and the women started to revolt against the men. And a diviner from the north, from the Luo speaking people of what is now South Sudan, so a non-Bantu group, arrived at the court, and he was received by the king, and he made a prophecy, reading the entrails of the sacred bull of the Bachuese. And in the entrails, he saw that a big tragedy was arriving. The Bachuese were going to disappear, making a collective suicide, drawing themselves in Lake Victoria, and a new dynasty was about to arrive. But at the same time, the myth show also the beginning of the Kubandwa religion, because the Bachuese made suicide, but their spirits survived, and they started to wander in the region, continuing to reign somehow in a spiritual form through the mediums. So, of course, it is a myth. We have to read to interpret the myth to understand what happened. There is no historical proof that the Kitara Empire really existed, but historians think that the myth adumbrates the introducing of the centralization of the centralized political organization. And it is quite important that this introduction took place exactly on the frontier between the Bantu-speaking societies and the Nilotic societies of the north. Probably the character of the diviner from the Luo represent an invasion or a migration of the Luo people to the south, which has been described by oral tradition from the north, that made some pressure on the societies of the Bantu societies, and somehow imposed a change in the political organization. So there were a demographic growth, new economic technique. We saw yesterday the introduction of banana and of extensive herders, pastoralism, and at the same time the migration from the north. So something happened and they had to invent a new political model. So Bunyoro, the kingdom of Bunyoro was started in that period. The British ethnologist John Beattie, he described in a wonderful way the kingdom and how it was organized. Of course, the main characteristic was the presence of a supreme leader, Omukama, in Lunyoro language. Omukama comes from the verb kukama, that literally means to milk. So there is a strong emphasis on pastoralism because the king reigned with the territorial chiefs, and they were Bahima, they were pastoralists, and under there were the common people who were bio, so they were agriculturalists. But the Mukama did not reign alone. He was not a dictator. He shared his power with some other important figure, namely the Queen Mother, his mother, a half-sister, which was called the Kaliota in Bunyoro, and another very important person who was called the Okwiri. The Okwiri is the firstborn brother of the king. It was very important. It is still very important because Bunyoro still exists as a kingdom, because the Okwiri is the chief of the clan, of the royal clan, the Babito. The royal dynasty of Bunyoro is still one clan of the Luo origin, and they are called Babito. So the chief of the Babito is the Okwiri, and so the Mukama, the king, he does not have the responsibility of his clan, and in this way he is free to become the king of everybody. So in my point of view, there is a very important change in this social structure. Before it was based on the clan. Now there is one king which overcomes the clan's interest, as I can say, and it is thanks to the institution of the okwiri. The economy were very much integrated between pastoralism and agriculture. There were a redistribution system and a gift of crops circulated from the bottom to the top of the structure. And also corvée, the agriculturist has had to work to give some corvée to the chief, as in Buganda. And the Bahima and the court gave back protection and ritual redistribution of food. So this is the system, and this, sorry, this was a slide showing, I forgot to show it, showing you the Bachuese dynasty, Isimbwa, who married Ninyamuiro, and these are the name of the Bachuese, and we can find all these names among the spirits of the Kubandwa cult up today. These are the spirits possessing the mediums, and Wamara, who is the last Bachuese king. So this model spread all over the region in different contexts. So Buganda, Nkore, Rwanda, Burundi, Busoga, many different examples of kingdoms that somehow replicated this model. But now I would like to focus especially on Buganda, because I worked a lot in Buganda, and so I want to take this example. So Buganda, in this map is a map of Buganda already in colonial time, because in pre-colonial time, Bunyoro was much bigger, and Buganda grew in this huge dimension under the British protectorate, because the British fought the Banyoro very much. The Banyoro made a very hard resistance against colonialists, and they suffered a lot during the colonial period. And the ingenious way that the British found to colonize Uganda was through the Baganda. So they reinforced the Buganda kingdom. They doubled their territories, taking the land from the Banyoro especially. And so historians speak about a Baganda sub-imperialism. So the Buganda kingdom, born in the 17th century as a principate of Bunyoro, in the myth is remembered because the founder of the Buganda kingdom is Chimera, who is the brother of Rukidi, the founder of Bunyoro kingdom. So the myth put Buganda and Bunyoro as brother kingdoms. But Buganda, when it separated himself from Bunyoro, it introduced some innovations. There are some important innovation in the structure of the Buganda kingdom. First of all, Buganda does not have herders. There is no pastoralism in Buganda because the land is very fertile, is very close to Lake Victoria. So they have wonderful banana plantation, and then they don't. So the class hierarchy, which is very strong in all the other kingdoms, and in Rwanda especially, is not present in Buganda. Everybody cultivates the land. Another important difference is the absence of the royal dynasty, because for the other kingdoms, the Babito are the origin of all the different dynasties today reigning in the kingdoms. But Baganda found another way. So they claim that the kingdom was founded as an alliance of different clans. And to avoid to have a royal dynasty, they use a matrilineal descent principle for the king. It is a very strange, very ingenious mechanism, so that when a king dies and a new king is come to the throne with his mother, at that moment he enter in his mother clan. So he is part of his matrilineal descent. In this way, they succeeded in finding a system where the royalty, the Obwakabaka, how they say, so the principle of the kingdom circulates among the clan. So there is no one royal clan. All the clans have the possibility to express one king, marrying women to the king, because when the king dies, one of his male heirs will fight to become king, and normally the Kabakas has hundreds of wives from different clans. So every clan can access to the kingdom. This is the capital of Buganda Kingdom in a draw made by the first explorers that arrived there in 1862. As you can see, it was a wonderful green capital. Under the banana plantation, there were the palace of the different chiefs, and on the top of the hill, the Lubiri, the royal enclosure, where the king stayed with his wives, concubines, page, and we will see how it was organized. The person of the king was very much sacralized thanks to some ritual procedures, and especially the funeral rites of the king was very complex, very long. When the king died, every activities stopped. They enter in what we call an interregnum, which was a period of chaos where all the rules were stopped, and the body of the king underwent some complex procedures so that his jawbone was detached from the body using red ants, and the jawbone was then decorated with cowrie shells and kept in the palace that became the temple of the jawbone, the temple of this royal spirit, while the capital was completely destroyed to be rebuilt in another place with the same architectural urbanistic shape. So let's see very briefly the structure of the Buganda kingdom is very similar to the Bunyoro. We have the king in Uganda. The king is called Kabaka, is a term connected with the jaw, because Kaba means jaw. He played his political role together with two women, his mother, the queen mother, Namasole, and his half-sister, like in Bunyoro, the Lubuga. And then under him, there were the ministers, and first of all, the prime minister, the Katikiro, and the other ministers living in the capital with him, the clan chiefs, and then the commoners, the agriculturalists living in the villages. So it is very important to emphasize the fact that Obwakabaka royalty was conceived as containing two important principles, a male principle and a female one, because Kabaka, the term Kabaka, was used also to call the Namasole, the Queen Mother, and the Lubuka. Also, these important women had the title of Kabaka. And it was not possible for a Kabaka to come to the throne if he did not have a mother. So the Namasole was the woman who made the king, because she was the one who pushed her son as a candidate, created a faction in her own clan to support the candidature of the king. And then when they were enthroned together. So she became the Namasole with her son. And at that moment, she built the new capital with her clanmates. So this sort of maternity aspect of the royalty was very important. The Lubuga was also an important figure, because she was a half sister of the Kabaka, meant that she was the daughter of the previous Kabaka, but of another mother. She was the chief of the princess of the court, the Bambeja. And when the king died, the Lubuka became the Naligna. The Naligna, she is the custodian of the royal tomb. And generation through generation, there is also always a Naligna that keep the royal tomb and organize this sort of spiritual court that is the royal shrine. And in Buganda now there are 36 royal tombs kept by the Naligna, and where mediums work, and through them the words of the Kabaka still arrive to the subjects. The jaw, they keep the jaw in the shrine, because the jaw is the symbol of the word of the Kabaka, and the word continues even if he is dead. So here, this is the book of John Orozco. John Orozco was an Anglican. He was an Anglican missionary who went to Uganda at the beginning of the 20th century. He was an anthropologist himself. He wrote this book, the Buganda, and he was in contact with James Fraser. So he started his research answering to Fraser a questionnaire, and then he became an ethnologist, and he worked very strictly with the Katikiro, the prime minister of Uganda, Apollo Kagwa. So he left us this wonderful ethnography. And here you see a photograph of the Queen Mother. The Queen Mother never walked. She was also always carried on the shoulders of a subject. And we can see, I think here, the Katikiro, Apollo Kagwa, was a very important person during the time when the British arrived in the capital. He is the one who drew the map of the capital at that time. So this plan have been prepared by Apollo Kagwa, and you can have an idea of how complex was the capital. So here we have all these streets with the plots of the different chiefs, and the position of the plots reproduce the position of the territories of the clan in the kingdom. So the capital was somehow a microcosm reproducing the geography of the kingdom. And on the hill, you have the Lubiri, the royal enclosure. And then you have the palace of the other important chief and minister. And here you see you have the palace of the Namasole, of the Queen Mother. The palace of the Namasole was divided, was separated to the palace of the king by a river. And the river represented the principle of exclusion. The Namasole and the king could never meet. It was forbidden for them to meet, but continuously messengers were sent from the two palaces to interact, because they interacted a lot. And the role of the Namasole was to control the power of the king so that his son could not abuse his power. So it was a very important role. And then the Katikiro is here and all the other palaces. And here, I go fast because we have a lot of things to say. Here you have the map of the Lubiri. Here we are inside the court, the royal enclosure. You see the palace here, where the Kabaka received his host, and where the parliament, yesterday Dimitri was speaking about the Uganda parliament, then you will see the present palace of the parliament. The Luciko is called in Uganda. The Luciko, so the council gather here, but around the palace of the king, you had all the houses of the wives, of the concubines, of the pages, of the cooks, and all the personnel which was working with the king. So now I try to discuss the gender organization of the court and of the common people, because here you have a picture of the palace of the last 4 Kabakas, the last 4 kings of Uganda, that is the so-called Kasubi tombs, which unfortunately burned in a fire a few years ago, and now they are destroyed. They are trying to reconstruct them. They contain some of the relics of the Kabakas, but the missionaries, of course, they forbid the practice of the detachment of the jawbone, and also forbid the destroying of the palace and of the capital. So this tomb contain 4 kings, which is completely contrary to the tradition. It is impossible for the in the pre-colonial time, it was impossible to have 4 spiritual royals living together. So that is the only one Ugandan site inscribed to the list of the UNESCO of the heritage of humanity, is in reality is a very untraditional place. And this, just to give you an idea, these are the relics of some kings, of the king of Buganda, Chibuka, a very old mythological figure, the jawbone decorated with cowrie shells, the penis, and some other relics. They were stolen by somebody and took to Britain by John Roscoe in 1906 and put in the Cambridge Museum of Ethnography, and then they have been given back to Uganda in '62 at the time of independence. So it's the first example of restitution. We will speak about museum and restitution on Tuesday. So gender structure, how was conceived the gender structure of the society in pre-colonial Buganda? There were 2 very different separated models. One is the gender structure used for commoners in the villages, and the other one is the one functioning inside the Lubiri. These are different way of conceptualizing gender. For the commoners in the villages, gender was quite a hierarchical structure where women were, of course, put at the bottom of the society. The family was based on a polygyny, so the husband had different wives co-living together in an enclosure, and the co-wives formed a sort of domestic unit, economic domestic unit, which carried out all the production activity. So agriculture was completely controlled by women who worked together in the fields of the husband. And also, of course, they were responsible for the reproduction of society through children. So the social value of women was recognized, especially by the institution of bride wealth, because to marry a woman, the family of the husband have to pay till now the bride wealth. So to compensate the loss of the productive and reproductive capacity of the woman for the family of the woman. And in this way, the children that will born from the marriage will become part of the husband clan. And in case of divorce, normally the women left the children in the village. Normally the rule, the residence rule after marriage was that the woman had to go to live in the husband village. So she's a foreigner in the village of the husband. And she worked for him, and she educated the children that belong to the husband clan. The only one way for a woman to escape to this quite rigid and hierarchical structure was to become a medium of the traditional religion, to become a mandua, mbandwa. Here you see two mediums, two female mediums of the religion. In the Kubandwa, there is no differences between men and women. Many female mediums tell that they start to manifest the symptoms of possession during marriage because they refuse to stay with the husband, and they show the symptoms of possession as a way to escape the marriage, or some of them start to be possessed during menopause, so after having lost their reproductive prerogatives. And anyway, when a woman becomes a medium, they say often that their cycle stopped, they don't have menstruations anymore. There are taboos regarding the houses of the medium, so that newborn babies cannot enter in the house of the mediums. The mediums cannot bear small children, or anyway cannot keep with them small children under 2 years of age, because they are considered contaminated. And in a quite similar way, the mediums cannot have any contact with death or with birth. So women cannot deliver inside the house of the medium, and nobody can die in the house of the medium, because the medium is the guarantee the separation between life and death. So there is a taboo regarding these passages. So women mediums somehow give up with their reproductive powers in order to gain mystical powers, which are conceptualized as political powers. And it is something that is not very far from what happened in Italy in the tarantulism cults in southern Italy, where also women started to show possession because of this crisis in their gender role. But let's see briefly what was going on inside the Lubiri, inside the court, inside the royal enclosure, because their gender was conceived in a completely different way. Inside the Lubiri, as we have seen, we had different people living. The Kabaka, the Queen Mother, Namasole. Here you see the picture of the last Queen Mother, because nowadays, after colonialism, the Queen Mothers completely have lost their power. This is the last one, the wife of Daudichwa, the young Kabaka, enthroned by the British, and she gave up because she remarried after the death of Daudichwa, and Namasole could not remarry, but she did. So the Namasole lived there. Here you see another picture of Drusilla, the last Namasole. The prince and the princess lived in the Lubiri, so the daughters and the sons of the Kabaka, as well as the brothers and sisters, matrilineal relatives of the Kabaka, they were called Bambeja, the princess, and Balangira, the princess. And here you see some princess. So, which was the gender, their gender status? Regarding the male, the Kabaka was considered the man among the men. He was Sebasaja, that's mean the most important male of the kingdom. He could have sexual relationships with anybody, wives, concubines, pages, homosexual relationships with page and also animals, because sexual power was conceived as a metaphor of political power. So it was his prerogative. Then you have the wives and the concubines of the Kabaka, and they were considered women. So they were female, biologically, and women socially. But then you had the princess, the Bambeja. The Bambeja, of course, they were female, but they were considered as men. They were considered as men. One had to address to them using the men sentences. You use the form sebo, which is used for the important men, and not nyabo, which is for women. And the princess, the Bambeja, could not have children. They could have sexual relationship with commoners, Bakopi, who were considered women inside the court. So they could marry Bakobi as husbands. And I should remember that in Sub-Saharan Africa, marriage between women was quite common. So you see, you have these different gender inside the Lubiri. To summarize, we have 4 genders, not depending on the biological identity, but depending on status hierarchy. So you have male men, the Kabaka. You had female men, the Bakobi and the pages. You have male women, the princess, the Bambeja, and female women, the wives and the concubines. What it is clear is that gender inside the court was not conceived as a biological characteristic, but it was a construction. And I also would like to emphasize the fact that even among the commoners, it is clear that gender is a construction, because if we consider the institution of the Senga, and the Senga is the paternal aunt, which is in charge of the education of girls when they reach puberty, and also is in charge of a practice which is widely common in the interlacustrine region, which is the elongation of labia minora, a practice carried out by the Senga in the bush. She takes the girls in the bush when they are 10, 12, and they practice this manipulation of the body, which is not, it doesn't hurt, but it is meant to transform the girl in an adult woman that can be married, and also to develop her sexual pleasure. Even here, through this institution of the Senga, we can see that for the Baganda, gender is a construction, is not a natural situation. So you have to be constructed as a man or as a woman. So, sorry. This just a few pictures of the Nalinha, the woman in charge of one Kabaka. This is the tomb of one Kabaka, and these are 2 custodian of the tomb, an Nalinha and a medium. This woman is a medium possessed by the spirit of the king. So you see, they become very free and autonomous out of the family, playing this role. So, and this now I don't have time to explain you. These are the balongo, there are the umbilical cords, other relics of the king and of the prince and princess that are kept in the tomb as a part of this system of spiritual transmission. So what happened with colonization? We saw yesterday the missionaries arrived inside the court, 1872-76. Immediately they started to work against this political system, especially in the gender organization. So they convert princes and kings, and they establish the first school, the first King's College in Budo. Budo is the coronation hill for the Uganda kingdom. So it was very much symbolic to establish the school for the prince and for the king in Budo. And there they educated the prince and the king. This is Daudichua, the first Kabaka under colonial protectorate. He was enthroned as a child, and this is already something very strange because he was not an adult. So the Katikiro, they were a regent who interacted with the British to reign, in fact, and he was educated in Christianity and in a completely different system of culture. And this is the girls' school. The missionaries organized another college for the princess in Gayaza, another spot in the capital. and they started to educate the princess, so the royals of the court. And which kind of model of gender model was transmitted in these schools? Of course, polygamy, polygyny was not acceptable anymore. So the girls had to learn how to behave toward the model that was the European 19th century Victorian family pattern. So to be the wife in a monogamous family, being able to play music, to do domestic work, so that, of course, to be a good Christian, to educate their children in Christianity, to carry out agricultural work, but especially to be there so that the husband could go to work in the factories, in the agricultural factories, because the colonial system was there to exploit the natural resources, and especially Uganda had a system of producing cash crops, tea, coffee, and sugar cane. So the family had to become a sort of economic part of this new capitalistic system that was about to be introduced. So the family changed completely, apparently, but as we saw yesterday in relation to religion, also here, also in the family structure and in gender structure, the old pattern was still there. Polygamy was not given up absolutely, but was practiced in hide, and the mediumship continued to give an escape to this situation. So just to conclude and coming to more recent time, of course, evangelization and colonization produce a short circuit, especially on this matter. Homosexuality that was commonly practiced by young people inside the Lubiri, inside the court, and this did not raise a sort of homosexual identity, because the pages later married and had children, but it was, sexuality was conceived in a very fluid way. Homosexuality in particular became a taboo in Uganda society. I don't know if you heard, but in 2014, the parliament, the national parliament, tried to promulgate a gay bill introducing death penalty to homosexual, and then it was stopped by a technicalities, but homosexuals are very much persecuted in Uganda now. While on the other side, the gender structure was addressed by the feminist movement. There is a strong feminist movement which started with Museveni government in the 80s, and now it gave the possibility to many women to reach the leadership position in the country, and this, I think, recall the traditional structure of the kingdom. So, and what's going on inside the court? This is the Bulange, the present building, home of the Luchiko of the Ganda parliament. Dimitri yesterday was speaking about it. You see how it is very big and wonderful building. It was given as a gift by the British just before the end of the colony, before independence. So in 1993, as we said yesterday, the kabaka was reinstalled. And later, in 1999, he married. He married this woman. The kabaka was educated, he's called Mutebi II. Mutebi was educated first in Buddo, King's College, and then in England. And she's called Sylvia Naginda. She was educated in the United States. They are Anglicans, they are Protestant. They married in Namirembe Cathedral. You see on the picture, Sylvia is kneeling as women have to do till now in the traditional way of greetings the men. They had only one daughter, but of course, the king, the kabaka, has other children from other women, and especially he has a son who has been declared the next heir of the kingdom, because these children, he's the son of the king and of a Uganda woman belonging to the Grasshopper clan. So somehow, even in the big changes, and the queen, who is called the Nabakereka, is somehow taking the place of the Namasole. The Namasole is not there anymore, and the wife is only one, so she became the queen. But somehow they keep something of the tradition, and in the reproduction of the kingdom, the heir will be the son of another woman, and Sylvia de Nabakereka is completely agreed. She completely agreed on this solution. So even in this field, I think that the Baganda succeeded in maintaining something of the past, even in a very changed world. So thank you. I think I will stop here. I hope I was not too long.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. It was very interesting and informative. I'm sure everyone will agree with me. And so, of course, now we can ask questions, so make comments. Who would like to be the first, please?
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Thank you very much. This was really great. My question is, now when they start at least try to reconstruct the original structure of this reigning, so why not to declare that this daughter is in fact a son, as usually it was tried in the past, and then to make a reverse, to find for her, of course, a husband, but then to declare that this is a woman?
Very good question, Marina. I think this is really inconceivable for Baganda. A woman cannot be the kabaka. She can be the queen, she can be the chief of the princess, but the kabaka must be a male. And this, I don't think, can change, at least now. I would like to say something, because I think that their conception of gender is not a conception, of course, where the genders are on the same plane. Is a conception that, on the contrary, tend to the complementarity of genders. So not equality, complementarity. Each one must play its own role. They cannot do the same. And I think that this is somehow the originality of the African system, where women play a role, but they must play their own role.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, any other questions?
Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting talk and very provoking to think, because I'm studying pre-Columbian civilizations, especially classic Maya. So my question was somehow connected with that idea of gender roles. Are there any evidence that in pre-colonial times women, royal women, yes, or noble women were engaged in military activities somehow related to war?
There are myths. There are interesting myths. One especially telling us the story of a kingdom where a queen was governing. It is at the border with Rwanda. Nyabingi is the name of this queen. And she reigned in a society where only women exist. And that one herder arrived and he taught to these women how to make sex, and they lost their power, and so they went back in their they enter in this gender structure. But formerly they were Amazons, they were soldiers. Of course, it's only a myth, so I don't think we have any historical evidence that women could fight. I don't think so. But the idea of another condition of women is there, at least in myths.
Thank you.
I have a question, if I may.
Sure.
A couple of questions, but first a comment to the previous question about why women were not allowed to become leaders. I'm not sure I would use the term allowed. It's more of a custom or norm, cultural norm, than political decision making. And my example comes from Native Americans, the Iroquois people, who are matrilineal, and their highest political body is the Council of Women. But the women are very wise because they always elect men to be sort of executive chief of the tribe. So women rule, but men become the executioners of their ruling. Women do not become chiefs, but they make decisions. The Council of Women is the highest political body, and it's all very much controlled by local customs and traditions, and there is no antagonistic relationship between men and women. They seem to they understand the situation as natural, if you want to use that term. No, but my questions are actually two sets of questions. First, about the political structure of the kingdom that you discussed. You use certain terms that I would like to clarify to see if I understand the kingdom correctly. For instance, well, first we start with the term kingdom. From what I understand from your description, it looks to me like is what service identifies chiefdom or paramount chiefdom. I don't engage in this warfare of typologies and terms. I find these things useless. I remember once there was a postdoc here at Princeton, and he wrote a paper on why not include the term kingdoms into the services typology of political systems. And after reading his paper, I still don't understand why we should do it. But anyway, if you call it a kingdom, that's fine. If it is a chiefdom or paramount chiefdom, is fine with me. My question is, what is the evidence of centralization of power in this political context? You mentioned that it was a centralized political system. You showed us a hierarchy of social statuses, which to me looked like a mixture of social class and rank society, or something in between, which I think is quite fascinating. For instance, there was a class of nobility, and then the mother queen. Here's one that's not social class of mother queens, but one person. So it's a mixture of what I see as rank and class level society, especially the class of you call them ministers or prime minister, which is quite interesting social status in a ranked society that doesn't exist usually, at least not in the societies I know as ranked. Yeah. So, what was the evidence of centralization of power, that the chief controlled the entire territory through his bureaucratic network? Now, the second question is about the term state. You use that term to identify the kingdom. Why state? Why do you think it's a state? What makes it a state level political complexity? No, and one more question about this kingdom. What was the economic foundation of its political power? Because I remember you discussed the staple crop being the banana, which was not a very good commodity when it comes to creating economic wealth. The New Guineans have tried that and never succeeded to create more complex societies than chiefdoms, or even less than chiefdoms, but domesticated the banana very early. No. So these are my questions about the political system, and a question about gender. Now, obviously, gender is a social construct everywhere. That's why we need to separate gender from sex. But why such complicated gender constructs in a society? We know that many African societies have used different gender classifications, and they switch gender roles, especially when it comes to sexual relations. Now, the Messiah, known about it, and others. But why such complicated system? Four genders. Four genders that I know, for instance, among Native Americans, are usually allocated to people of what they call two spirits, basically gay people. In the case you discussed, those four genders exist also outside of the context of homosexuality, right? That is not just limited to gay people. So what is the meaning of those four genders? And finally, a comment. I think that even if from your fascinating ethnohistory of people, that's why ethnohistories are always a big interest to me. But the fact that royal females, under the royal court, females enjoyed higher status because of gender, this situation did not improve the position of commoner women, as you very nicely indicate. The common women have have always been, like in many other societies, at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Whereas, so why is that? I'm quite interested. Why the fact that the women in the royal court enjoyed a higher status, and some even were considered as men, and it did not reflect on the women in outside of the court. Sorry about this long list of questions.
Thank you very much for interesting observations and questions. And I hope that Peter Skalnik will appear somehow to answer to your question on the stage.
Well, he disappeared. Yeah.
Oh, no. Peter is here.
Yes. So let me start. You're very right when you observe that the terminology I used, kingdom, chiefdom, can be criticized. I think that here there is very much a projection of the British ethnologists as well in the colonial period, who liked to see their kingdom mirrored in what they were seeing in Uganda. So probably they forced a bit the terms. Probably we should use the local terms, but what I would like to say is that there is a political ideology which in my perception emphasize the idea of royalty. When they Baganda speak of Obwakabaka, it's not only the institution of the chief, is really a system. And probably I did not emphasize enough the aspect of sacralization of these roles. Because for the Baganda, the Kabaka is not only a political leader, is much, much more. It's really a style of living. I don't know how to say, but there is one American anthropologist, Holly Anson, who wrote a nice book on Baganda, and she speaks about the love the subjects feel for their Kabaka. So maybe they are chiefdoms, you're right, but I think that the ideology is of a very structured political system, which probably they themselves, they like to translate with kingdoms, with royalties. I don't know. About economy, redistribution, yes, but it's not banana. Bananas is not something that you can share. You can only consume it. The wealth was expressed in terms of herds, number of cows. And the economic system was a system of redistributions of food, work, as in medieval Europe, I think, or a way of work. The Buganda state, I would like to call it state, was crossed by streets, straight roads that need to be maintained because they were very mobile. They walk a lot. They walk because they didn't have any means of transport. They walk a lot. And to maintain this system of communication, they had to ask for a way of work. And so I think it was a quite complex administrative organization. Probably I didn't describe it enough, but I think that it can be called a state. But here, of course, there is a big debate on pre-colonial, primitive state, and Peter edited an important book on this, so I don't know if he can answer. And finally, the things of gender. You're right, the gender organization is very complicated inside the court. Why? My impression is that gender is conceived on the basis of social status. It's not a sexual biological identity. So if you belong to a lower class, you are a woman. If you belong to a higher status, you must be a man, because if you have a high status, you cannot be a woman, and that's why the princesses are considered men. And so it's nothing to do with biology, but social hierarchy is very important. So why it does not work in the villages? Because I think somebody must produce the food and reproduce the children, so they need to have workers, and the women work because the men do not work. Men only work as politicians even now. So the work is made by women, and they are the proletariat, and who do not belong to this class cannot be a woman. This is my perception. Homosexuality. If you tell to a Uganda if homosexuality never exists there, they say no, we never had homosexuals. Even if sexuality was very fluid, was very, I mean, in private life, in your house, you could have sexual relationship with anybody. It's not a public, not made public, but no problem. But this didn't produce an identity. So sexual relationships do not produce a gender identity. This I think they are very separated spheres. So that's why they say, no, we don't have homosexual, because nobody has only same gender sexuality. And nobody use sexuality to identify themselves clearly in public. That's not fair, I think. That's not elegant. You don't speak about sexuality in Uganda. So what happened when the LGBT movements, Americans, they arrived there, they started to speak openly about this matter, and this is completely unfair. And they produce a sort of shock. And so this produced the violence against homosexuals. But formerly, you were very free to do whatever you wanted, but there were not labels. So it's very different from the two spirits, I think. It's a fluid conception of sexuality. And I think it's interesting. So they are not going, now they use this label LGBT, but formerly it was just a continuum of possibilities. I don't know if I answered.
Well, let me penetrate into the discussion. Well, Vladimir asked why state, right? I should put it a little bit another way around. I would say that if there were a single African pre-colonial kingdom, which was close to the typical model, the typical idea of the state, typical for political anthropology of services time, for example, typical for even our habitual ideas of what the state is. That kingdom would give Buganda. Probably the second one would give the Congo kingdom, because contrary to the overwhelming majority of pre-colonial African kingdoms, in Buganda they had what could be called territorial rather than kinship-based division, administrative division, and those administrative units were administered by the people who can be called bureaucrats. They were appointed by the king without any relation to their kinship ties to the subjects. Well, and Buganda is actually the only example in pre-colonial Africa of a society in which the elements of private land ownership were appearing prior to the Europeans coming, and even more so, just that fact allowed the British to introduce the system of, which was called milieu, of private land ownership in colonial Uganda, and that was the only successful attempt of the colonizers to introduce private land ownership in pre-colonial Africa. In colonial Africa, just because the elements of private land ownership were in pre-colonial Buganda already. So really, if let me repeat that, if there was a state in pre-colonial Africa, whatever this could mean, that was Buganda. And the question I wanted to ask Cecilia, I personally, I do not have a clear answer to it. Well, although I've read quite a lot on this issue, but I would like to hear you. So can you provide any explanation to the effect of such a specific position of the kingdom of Buganda among other pre-colonial African kingdoms? Why it became so unusual for pre-colonial Africa?
Buganda is extraordinary, you're right. But, when you work there and you study the traditions, you realize more and more how sophisticated they were. It's really an incredible construction of customs and beliefs, ideology, very, very complex. I don't know if we have penetrated it completely. Why Buganda? Probably the interlacustrine area is a region of very sophisticated societies, because Rwanda as well. Speaking about the states, we didn't mention the army. They had an army, like in Rwanda, and there is a development of the organization of the military, which is also very important. Myself, I think that the ecological conditions there are very, very lucky. So the food production is so abundant, it's so easy. They can support the complex society, they can support specialists, they can have a very differentiated society, and the history is a secular history of development. Probably you know the book of the French historian now I don't remember, but the Great Lakes region, 2,000 years of history. Chrétien, Jean-Pierre Chrétien, he described the processes of evolution of the societies which took place in 2,000 years of history that we don't know very well yet. That is our ignorance. And he described very well how sophisticated these societies could become without money, without writing, and without means of transport. But of course, the societies were complex. It's difficult to answer.
Well, I shall say that, it's too difficult to give any definite answer. Well, and but of course, I'm grateful for your sharing your views. Thank you very much. And Piotr Skalnik writes to me in chat that he has a question for you. So Piotr, you are welcome.
He's there.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, my screen is very strange, so that you see me a little bit distorted. Probably it is the lens. Cecilia, thank you so much for developing further the debate. There may be a whole library of books and articles about this area, but you are giving it a new dimension. You are re-evaluating data which are known and bringing in especially this gender business, but also other aspects. My question is about the origins, because I remember my teacher, Dmitry Olderoge, wrote once in 1949 an article, Hermetic Question in African Studies. And this was reaction to some mostly British speculations about that actually the sophistication you are talking about is caused by some light-skinned Hamites from the north who probably were mixed with blackest people, the Nilotes. It's a mystery to me how it came into a discussion like that. But in any case, I would like to know whether you have found in your research any allusion to that this sophistication is due to some foreign influence, whatever cause, whatever kind, whether these were some light-skinned Hamites or whatever was it, but foreign influence. That is what Dmitry Olderoge wanted to attack at that time. Thanks a lot in advance.
Yes, Peter, you're right. I did not mention the Hamiltic Hypothesis. It has been very popular in a certain period. It has been the object of a big debate. In my view, this hypothesis, it was introduced by John Hammond Speke in his journal, the Journal of the Discovery of the Nile Sources. He started to speak about the Bahima, describing them as foreigners coming from Abyssinia, close to the Galla. And since they came from that region, from Ethiopia, where the tradition of empire developed, they took the centralized model in the area. So Speke, I think, invented the Hamiltic Hypothesis. He put it in a racial light because he spoke of races. And then everybody followed him because the missionaries, everybody wrote at the time about this region, spoke about this, use this frame, which, you know, it was had so heavy and dramatic consequences because you see the Batutsi as a foreign race coming from Ethiopia was very much part of the problem which took to the genocide in 1994. And in the manifest of the Bahutu, they said the Tutsi should go back to Ethiopia where they come from. But in my view, there is no evidence at all, no evidence at all. And the archaeological founds show that at the beginning of our era, so 2,000 years ago, already there were pastoralists and agriculturalists in the region. Probably the agro-pastoral system started around the 9th, 10th century because of some changes. Maybe the arrival of banana from Indonesia was important, maybe, I don't know, very many different factors, of course. But myself, I think that the pastoralists are there at least since 2000 years. Maybe they also have a sort of policy of giving to their bodies some particular shape through marriages, through food. So somewhere they can have a different aspect, but also this is very, very difficult to demonstrate. So the Hermetic hypothesis is a 19th century typical European theory, racial theory, that were projected on this area and made a lot of terrible, bad consequences. So I think we should avoid to use it. And it's not found in the oral tradition. The oral tradition do not speak about migration of this type. There are migration from the Luo, yes, this you can find, but not from far away. And anyway, the Luo did not took the power because the Bagnoro, the centralized model is not the Luo model, is original from Bagnoro. So myself, I don't think we can use any more of this hypothesis.
Well, you mentioned the oral tradition, so I just wanted to comment and to ask you about it, because, well, I started my work in African studies with pre-colonial West Africa, and of course I used oral traditions very intensely. But at the same time, of course, since I shall say mid-80s, actually, the mid-80s, as you probably know, as you definitely know, criticism on the oral tradition as a source is growing very much, although previously there were brilliant works by Pennacini, by Manet, and many others. But now, many anthropologists, I shall say maybe even most anthropologists, do not trust the oral tradition. They always declare it something new, something recent, politically bound to current politics and so on and so forth. Well, I see it as a manifestation of a kind of postmodernist approach to the African past. But at the same time, you said that in the very beginning of your talk, that in the region you are working with, you are dealing with, well, the oral tradition is combined as a source with archaeological evidence. But even despite the fact that probably East Africa is better studied archaeologically than West Africa, for example, and particularly Uganda by Robert Shaw, by Schönbrunn, and many other archaeologists. Well, of course, archaeology of Africa is not as developed as that of Europe or the Near East, you know. Well, so I do not believe that each and every important point, important event mentioned by the oral tradition is supported by archaeology by now. Well, and sometimes I think that we are in a kind of a deadlock. We should either trust the oral tradition or reject it altogether. If we trust, especially in terms of, for example, dates it provides, of course, it's very difficult to trust. We should accept them as something conventional. But anyway, so do you see any way out of this deadlock? Can we either verify, find a way to verify the oral tradition, or should we continue just accept it, or maybe really reject it?
You're right that present anthropology often forget to reconstruct the history of societies, and I think that this is a big lack, because how can you understand what is happening if you don't try to go back to the past? This is important, but of course the sources are a big problem. So of course we cannot trust oral tradition. We should interpret them, and myself, I've been working for a long time with mediums who transmit some oral traditions through songs and prayers, and I recorded all the names of the kings, of the heroes, of the spirits, but you cannot reconstruct a history on this base. It's completely confused, and you change village and you hear other names, but this gives you some idea of the ideology they used to look at the past. Then, of course, I think we need archaeology. In Uganda, there are 2 archaeologists now. So this is a field that is completely unexploited in a country where there are sites, but they are not studied at all. And then there are other methods that you can use. Of course, I think that Vansina is right, that we need to continue to look for history, in the pursuit of history, as is the title of his book, no? Even if it's so difficult, but it's necessary to collect tradition and to try to interpret them. Avoiding ideology, because if you go to Uganda, many people say, we are the heir of the Bachuese, we had the Guitar Empire, and if I say, no, the Guitar Empire never exists, they are shocked. No? So we should treat the sources somehow in a scientific way, not in an ideological way, but we don't have any other sources. So what can we do? Maybe Peter has some ideas, I don't know, but I think it is important to continue to work on history, because otherwise Africa will never have an history. And we should say that Africa has an history, that we can try to reconstruct.
I fully agree with you. Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments from the colleagues? Okay, then, well,
maybe one comment on oral histories. Obviously, we shouldn't reject oral histories. They are significant sources of information, but they should be verified. A good example of that is, for instance, what happened to the Norse, the Vikings, sometime called, and the sagas that they reported on the Vikings visiting North America almost 500 years before Columbus, and now we have archaeological evidence that it happened. There is one confirmed site in Canada, in Newfoundland, and there might be, or should be more if they were here. So oral histories are definitely a good source of information. They shouldn't be the only source of information, but we should use them, especially if we can verify or try to verify oral histories through archaeological methods.
Yeah, the problem is that particularly in Africa, as Cecilia and I just noted, archaeology is developed rather poorly compared to many other regions, including, for example, not only such classical areas as Europe or the Near East, but or Central America, but for example, North America. Well, and the prospects of extension of the archaeological work in Africa are not so bright, I shall say, in my view, because for different reasons, beginning with climatic. Well, and it's, for example, in West Africa, it's very difficult to make excavations in the tropical zone because of the forest and many other climatic and natural reasons. And up to the positions of many African states, to be honest, and even academic communities in these countries, where today, in some countries, quite a lot of countries, they're trying to close the archaeological field for Europeans, Americans, and at the same time, their own archaeologists do not publish much, especially at the international level. So I shall say that the problem with the oral tradition in Africa is much more grave than elsewhere, because just the possibilities to verify the oral tradition in Africa are much more limited than elsewhere. This is the problem, as I see. And today, by the way, the oral tradition is manipulated in Africa by many political public figures and so on. For example, well, as for the Kingdom of Benin, so which is in the contemporary southwestern Nigeria, the pre-colonial Kingdom of Benin. When I studied it not so long ago, actually, in the late 80s, 90s, and so on, well, maybe some 20 years ago, there were different versions of the oral tradition, but all of them, this or that way, started the time of the Benin Kingdom from somewhere about, 12th century, common era. Well, but today they write openly that the kingdom appeared before Christ, and for most people in Benin City today, it's obvious. They write to me that, as we all know, the kingdom appeared in the 1st century before Christ. So no evidence for that. But of course, it's really a political issue there, because, for example, they want to prove this way that their kingdom is more ancient than kingdoms of the Yoruba, because according to the older version of the oral tradition, the Yoruba prince founded the Benin Kingdom. And all this has direct relation to political struggle, inter-ethnic political struggle in Nigeria nowadays. And the possibilities to verify the oral tradition are very limited in Africa. Okay, so dear colleagues, any other ideas, comments? Well, yes, Peter. Peter, you wanted to say?
Спасибо. Yeah, I would first say that indeed these historical monuments or historical remnants and archaeological, it has to continue and discover. A recent book on golden rhino by a French historian, it just relies on Arab resources and nothing else almost. So this is not sufficient, of course. History of Africa is something more rich. But I would like something else. I was fascinated by Cecilia's talking about royal jaw. The royal jaw is absolutely incredible, and it's very pity for me that it was rejected. In my country, Bohemia, it's interesting that we keep the skull of the earliest ruler, Saint Wenceslas, which was partly religious and partly political prince. And this is kept in the Prague castle. And every new president of the country, when he's elected, or she would be one day hopefully elected, goes and bows in front of this skull as a kind of corroboration of symbolic expression of this long, more than 1,000 years of history. So this, I think, is important to look into other cases where the physical remnants, and of course Middle Ages are full of collecting of the fragments from Jesus Christ and other saints, but I mean for on political anthropological side about how the power of today's rulers or recent rulers was supported by some kind of fragments of the body of the previous rulers. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. So any other?
And you know, Peter, you know that Italy is full of saint relics in every church, and still now, once a year, the blood of San Gennaro melt in the church in Naples, and the mayor of the town and all the political leaders are there to testimony of this phenomenon. So for us, it's quite the present phenomenon. It's very interesting.
Okay, so any more comments? Then okay, then I should thank Cecilia very much in the name of us all, I'm sure, and remind you that the third and unfortunately the last in this cycle, well, talk by Cecilia will take place on Tuesday, October 26th, the same time, and it will be on a different topic. Well, on museum anthropology, as Cecilia is not only, as we know, professor in anthropology, but also the director of the Museum of Ethnography of the University of Turin. So, well, and I believe that this topic is also very interesting and important as far as museum anthropology is becoming a very, well, a very important field, subfield within the wider field of anthropological discipline. So thank you very much, everybody, especially Cecilia, of course. Well, and see you all on Tuesday.
So thank you. I won't be able to join you on Tuesday. I have to teach, but I have enjoyed the two talks very much. Thank you.
If you like, you can later see it on YouTube. Well, all our
YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody, and see you on. Thank you, Cecilia, once again.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. See you on Tuesday.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.